This criminal cartel hijacked a bus full of passengers and forced them to fight each other to the death just to survive, all so they could watch and enjoy the chaos. You've all watched Squid Games, a game where if you get a game over, you don't start again. In the real world, there are many examples of these deadly games, where the line between life and death vanishes in a game that is sometimes tough, sometimes simple, and even childlike. A bus full of ordinary people, young and old, men and women, was traveling between cities in a South American country when it was hijacked by a ruthless cartel. They were taken to a remote desert, but this was no ordinary kidnapping for ransom or torture. What awaited them was a twisted, tragic, and deadly game. The captors divided the passengers into pairs, placing dozens of weapons, both cold and firearms, into boxes. The people were given a choice: fight. The battles were horrific and unfair. Young men against elderly women, a strong man against a delicate girl, even teenagers who had no understanding or power to defend themselves. A grotesque display of brutality. This cruel spectacle pushed the limits of human decency, forcing people to not only defeat someone they'd only just met on the bus, but also to betray their own conscience. And for those who couldn't bring themselves to compromise their morals, the cartel had a simple solution: they would run them over with the bus. These insane behaviors were also common in other criminal cartels. One of the deadly pastimes of these groups was to play with the lives of their victims and discarded pawns. But the difference here was that no defensive skills could save their lives. This cartel had a simple game for those who were no longer of use to them, with just 2 rules. First, roll the dice. If any number except 6 comes up, you don't survive. But if a 6 comes up, your prize is that you get to roll the dice again. However, this kind of behavior wasn't exclusive to drug cartels. In one of the states in America, there was an ordinary man who spent his days baking bread. But at night, he had a much darker agenda. He would go into the streets looking for women who were homeless, struggling with addiction, or in vulnerable situations. He would offer them work, a safe place to stay, or even drugs, all to lure them into his home. But his home was a trap. He would take these women on his old plane to a remote forest, and there, a deadly game began. He would give them a brief chance to flee, but once they ran, he would begin hunting them, testing his skills with a bow and arrow. His goal wasn't just to catch them, but to break their spirit and will to survive. This twisted game wasn't just about life and death. It was about manipulating the human mind. And the worst part? The end was always the same. In the 1980s, a mathematics professor lived in one of the Eastern European countries. Like most math teachers, he had a fascination with young, brilliant minds capable of solving his complex equations. So, he frequented places where the chance of finding such individuals was higher. Math classes, Olympiads, and even professional chess tournaments. He handpicked students who showed exceptional talent, or those who excelled in intellectual games, and invited them to his mysterious home. From the moment they arrived, their intellectual trials began. He would challenge them with the intricate mathematical equations he had designed, but these mind games weren't limited to just math. They included complex cubes, mental puzzles, and hidden ciphers. It was the most difficult test for any promising student, a place where time slipped away, and even the weight of their breathing seemed to work against them. The stakes were high. The penalty for failing wasn't just flunking the course or being expelled from the university. The professor believed that anyone who couldn't solve these puzzles didn't deserve to live. But that math professor wasn't the only sadistic, psychotic professor who played with the lives of his students. Not long ago, another university professor decided to create a terrifying game. A game where this time, there was no puzzle or challenge to solve. Only one outcome: death. This professor suffered from severe psychological disorders. and his inhumane behavior and unethical speeches were just part of his plan to toy with the minds and souls of his students. He deliberately chose students who were emotionally unstable or suffering from deep depression, humiliating them and pushing them further into isolation. Gradually, he told them that in order to continue their lives, they had to make a horrific decision. A group planned to end their lives on a specific date. And the horrifying part of the story? Not only did he guide their decision-making, but he also watched these human tragedies unfold, and he enjoyed it. Fate wrote the same ending for some unlucky tourists who came to visit Chicago in the 18th century. A charming businessman had opened a hotel that offered special rooms for those traveling alone in Chicago. This hotel had 3 floors, the lobby and upper floors with luxurious rooms, and the basement with narrow, eerie hallways and deadly rooms. But what no one knew was that in that lower level, in the depths of darkness, the cries echoing through the walls were no accident. Those who entered these rooms never came out. When victims chose their room number, they were, in fact, choosing their method of death. Toxic gas chambers with a foul stench, a boiling pool that instantly destroyed any attempt at escape, or freezer rooms so cold that they paralyzed the body before freezing it solid. This twisted game, however, was part of a dirty business. He sold the corpses of his victims to illegal medical schools or unlicensed hospitals. Bloody and horrifying games can be found in every chapter of history's book. Games like Russian roulette or cowboy duels, though voluntary, were utterly insane. Perhaps the most extreme of them all took place in ancient Rome. Back then, death was not merely an end. It was something that spectators celebrated because for them, death in the arena was akin to victory in life. From wild group battles filled with gladiators, to competitions on ships filled with water in the Colosseum, to fights with blindfolds on, where the fighters didn't even know who they were killing to claim their own victory in life. But perhaps the strangest and most painful display they held for entertainment were performances of plays taken to the point of real death. Imagine Icarus, the mythical figure from ancient Greece, who crafted wings made of wax to escape captivity, only to fly too close to the sun, melting his wings and causing his fall. Now, if someone were playing the role of Icarus in a performance, they would be thrown from a great height to their death. This was probably the most realistic performance in history. The thought of how many individuals in history playing the roles of mythical legends lost their lives in these shows, yet their names were never remembered, haunts the soul. And in the end, the deadly game we all participate in, life. A game where from the moment we are born, we become addicted to a breath of air, fighting for it and every other reward until the end of our lives. In this lawless game, everyone plays their role, trying to survive, though some try less than others. Ultimately, the question isn't when we will die, but in this game, will we ever truly live, or will we just be running from death?